Okay. And then on this video, I wanted to talk. So now I've figured out there's like this multi-dimensional space within which we view and discern things within the field of relativity. Everything that I've dealt with this theory that I've worked on is focusing on the field of relativity only. Things that I can deduce a priori, rationally, that only has to do with metaphysics, ontology, cosmology, things like that. Pure philosophy. But it doesn't have anything to do with physical manifestations in the objective field or in the subjective field. So I don't know if there is a God or not. I don't know if there's a right answer or not. But I do know that given the field of logic, if we just assert that the entire field of logic, or as I call it, the field of relativity, exists, and deductive reasoning exists, and we just assert that, and that's our central axiom, then we get the reference frame, which is equal to the entire field of relativity. And within that field of relativity, there is an infinite number of theoretical paradigms or ways of viewing things, their vantage points in this field. And they all look at, just like I said, that referent, that axiom of being a deductively reasonable, logically valid, integrated, cohesive theory. So all logical theories, regardless of whether or not they are mutually contradictory or exclusive or whatever, all possible theoretical theories occupy the field of relativity, the field of logic. Some of those theories overlap with others on some of their positions that they take. Some of the conclusions of some logical theories converge, where multiple theories all say the same things, or at least non-contradictory things about the same stuff. And those positions where they converge and agree are points whose congruence, cohesive, integrated structure is what I call the metastructure, or the one theory that rules over all the theories of relativity. Any theory that we come up with that has a deductive reasoning process to it will fit in there. And if you combine all of them, there's going to be at least some overlap with at least one other theory in at least one position, which will occupy the metastructure as a total integrated theory of theories. That metastructure is what we're going to need as humanity to join the intergalactic community of all the aliens and be able to fully integrate into their conglomerate system. Until then, we can have a structure, we can have a theoretical structure, which is going to be the Deus Ex Machina theory. And it's not a theory of everything. The metastructure is a theory of everything. It's a theory of everything relative, everything discernible. And that is the reason that we need a metastructure in order to join the intergalactic community and not simply a structure is because if we only develop a structure, then we can fall into the belief that that structure is the metastructure. And by doing so, we'll get so proud and so arrogant that we'll think that that theory is the only possible theory that ever could be true. And it can happen. It is possible that humanity will, on average, do that. If I unveil my structure, they could find that to be the metastructure because of its scope and because of its absolute consistency with itself. If I finish making Deus Ex Machina the way that I want to, there won't be any errors, there won't be any gaps, everything will be congruent and contiguous and non-contradictory with itself. And that and its scope will encompass all possible discernible objects, meaning there won't be anything in logic left untouched by my structure if I build it the right way. And that means that humanity could theorize that it is the field of relativity, since it spans the entire length of the field of relativity. But that's not the case. And that's what I was so afraid of, is that I would think that too. And I did for a long time. And that's what was scaring the shit out of me about going to hell and all kinds of other things that I've had panic attacks about, is because I kept thinking that this theory is the metastructure, and that therefore I am, a really evil guy for introducing it, because everybody's going to have to follow it and they'll be shackled to perfection and all this stuff. But that's not the case. It's just one among an infinite number of any possible theories that you want to come up with. And all of the theories, even though they all have the same processes of deductive reasoning, they all have different central axioms that they assert to begin with. The thing about Deus Ex Machina is it asserts nothing as its beginning. And it asserts, like all the field of relativity theories assert, that deductive reasoning exists. And there's no way to prove that deductive reasoning exists, because it is one of the it's one of those arguments or axioms that spans the entire length of the field of relativity. But it doesn't extend beyond it, and so there's no way of proving it exists, but we can assert that it exists. And like all theories that are of the field of relativity or of the field of logic, assert that deductive reasoning exists. It has to in order to function. So that's one of the axioms that it makes, like all theories make. But what it asserts that's specific to it is that it asserts nothing. Now, that combination between asserting deductive reasoning and then conjoining that deductive reasoning with nothing is what will lead to the paradoxes that emerge, etc. And those paradoxes get resolved in a logically deductive way. And that's, that's why I call it Deus Ex Machina. It kind of bakes its conclusion into its premise. It basically asserts that it's true offhandedly and arbitrarily. And I admit that. It isn't a cut and dry thing when you look at it for what it really is. It's just a really fancy decoration that you can put on your Christmas tree at Christmas time if you want to, if you believe in Santa Claus. So that's basically what it boils down to. It's a very fancy little decoration. Now, if you want to use it, it's useful. It does its job. It's just that you have to remember what its job is, and its job is not to tell you about God. It's not to tell you about your soul. It's not to tell you about what the meaning of life is and all this stuff. It will conjecture that. It will speculate about that. But it's, again, only one among an infinite number of possible alternatives. And again, if we stop there and we just say, well, we're just going to assume that it's the only structure that exists and invalidate and exclude and close our eyes to any other theory that could possibly exist, then we will necessarily exclude pretty much all of the SAMs, because there's going to be a very tiny minority that would even accept my structure, let alone find it to be compelling enough to be, the end-all be-all metastructure itself. It will be taken into account, and it will be treated like every other theory, but that doesn't mean that it's hook, line, and sinker for humanity. It's just barely opening the front door. And, once we get into the room, then we can start talking about who we're going to meet in there and all that stuff. But all I'm doing right now is just trying to get humanity to the threshold, and hopefully one little baby step, past the threshold into the room. And then as we explore, then we'll start to find other rooms, not rooms, but other doors into that room and other people in that room, and etc. And so over time we can join the party, but that's how you get in the door, is you have to have a full scope, a fully integrated, deductively reasonable theory. If you don't, there's not really a way of translating anything that you might say or think or feel into what they think or feel. The way that people communicate is they find a common symbol. And so the most common symbolic language that there is the language of logic, deductive reasoning. It spans across all the civilizations that are, at least rather civilized. I guess you could have other theories that you could go about it in some other way. Maybe you could just be artistically compelling, or maybe you could be really scientifically, engineering wise, really a whiz kid and just come out with some physical theory. Fine. You can make whatever kind of a theory that you want to, but this one is rational and deductive. And so that's the one that I'm using. And that's what I'm referring to when I refer to the metastructure. It is always a deductive theory. Now, being that as it may, the way that we interact with the SAMs is going to get more precise and more rational when and where and if we use rational systems as our platform to talk with them. It will be more artistic if we use more artistic systems, and it will be more physical if we use more physical systems. So the approaches are always going to be available, and they're already available now. But what I'm talking about is, like, in general, big leaps forward. So in my opinion, being the founder of Deus Ex Machina, and me being a rationalist, and me leaning towards deductive reasoning as my strong suit, as my go-to, that's the one that I focused on for my structure. But if you wanted to build an artistic genre or something like that, you can. A religious structure, you can. A physical instrument or tool, you can. I just chose this method because that's the easiest one for me. But it's not like they won't talk to you unless you have this theory. It's just, it makes it more rational so that you can integrate a rational theory with the larger metastructure. And hopefully, as we get closer to revealing that metastructure, we will be able to create better laws and have greater, I guess you'd say, legislative abilities. That's what this is for. It's for setting of laws, methodologies, processes by which we arrive at logically valid conclusions. So that's good for logistics and, logical processes, but it doesn't extend into artistic or physical processes yet. It might, but the way that I'm going to write it initially, it's just going to be relativistic. So I say this just to try to get my own head around what it is that I'm doing, so I can have a contextual value for what it is that I'm doing. And while it is valuable, it's not the only valuable thing that you could ever possibly do with your life. It's just something that I chose to do. And the purpose of it is to eventually find this thing that I think we'll find is the metastructure, which is the one theory that rules them all inside the field of relativity, inside the field of logic and, philosophy. It would be the greatest philosophical finding that we could possibly look toward and perfect over time. It isn't necessarily the key to God or anything like that, But I think that it greatly enhances someone's ability to predict the future, because most of the stuff in reality is predictable and you can predict it with accuracy, knowing these structures, and especially knowing the metastructure. That will really help with logical validation of, I guess you would say, reasoning. Going from premise one to premise two and then finding the conclusion. That's what this theory is built to do. As opposed to creating your own premise, which is an art, and just raw discovering the conclusion through induction with science. So those are the three major branches as I see them. And there's all kinds of ways of slicing the pie. That's just the way that I like to slice it, because it's the most rational way to do it. But you can do it all kinds of different ways. And each of those ways, again, there's going to be a I don't know what you would call that, maybe an omnistructure, which is some kind of an integration between the metastructure of the logical philosophical realm with the aesthetic, artistic, subjective realm of creating premises or arbitrating them that have the deepest intuitive impact. That's an art. The choosing of which assertions that you start off with in the logical theory that you're talking about, that is an art. How you arrive at those is an art. So that process of, starting from just a subject to a subject that concludes some arbitrary axiom that they can then use as the seed to prepare their logical framework or paradigm or structure, as I've used the term. And then there's the method of actually executing or applying the theory, the logical theory, to affect the world in some way. And that is its own science. That's an inductive science, where you're just going to have to go through trial and error. You're going to have to do things that, quote unquote, make common sense or mechanical sense in regards to having already been given these artistic axioms and this logical methodology. How to apply that in the real world, that's going to be hit and miss, trial and error, induction through science and experimentation. And so that is, quote unquote, an art unto itself. It's also a field. It's also a branch on this Trinity way of looking at things. And so this is what I'm doing. The Deus Ex Machina structure is purely rational. It doesn't have anything to do, it doesn't try to justify its assertion of nothing. It doesn't even say why it makes the assertion, as far as like trying to tell you the artistic, intuitive value of it. Although I might touch on that just to show that you can, maybe, but I'll probably reserve that for a book unto itself, which I'll call Lucidity, because it's going to have a religious tone to it, and that's an entirely different ballgame. So I'm going to keep those two separate, and then that will showcase how you can extend from a logical theory backwards into subjectivity. And you can also just come up with your own subjective thing and then extend that forward into a logical philosophy, where it's actually a full system. Instead of it just being a manifesto, it's now a constitution. It has a logical, rigorous, formal, way of looking at it, versus just an intuitive, artistic way of looking at it. So all of that is, on the table of what I'm doing here. Oh, and then of course there's the execution of these laws that I'm going to find in Deus Ex Machina. Those will then be applied in the Constitution for a political, economic, and cultural system that I'm going to invent that also mirrors this same thing. So when I get done with all three of those theories, then where it'll be lucidity, which is the artistic component, it's religious, it has to deal with how you assert things to begin with, and it justifies the assertion of nothing versus any other assertion, using some artistically intuitively valuable measure. And then from lucidity, then you've got the point of lucidity, the end result of it is to produce the assertion of nothing. And that assertion of nothing is then taken as given in Deus Ex Machina as the origin point of the field of relativity, of constrained to the finite level of the Deus Ex Machina theory, which then extends to the terminus point of where everything that could be referred to, it could be discerned within the theory, given the constraints it has on how it defines reality, etc. And the end result of that is going to be what? It's going to be the end result or product of Deus Ex Machina will set up the Constitution. And the Constitution needs to define what a person is, what life is, and all of those things. The definitions of all the things that we need to refer to: life, justice, morality, ethics, law, all of those things that are what I call discernibles. Those things are defined in Deus Ex Machina, and then those definitions are taken as given in the Constitution, which then executes the Deus Ex Machina reasoning into real-time, everyday actualizations. And the full breadth of that mega theory or meta theory is going to be something else. I'll name that something else. I don't know what yet, but that will be my life's work. When I get done with all three of those books, Lucidity, Deus Ex Machina, and the Constitution of whatever thing I end up calling it. I still haven't been able to come up with a name for the political system that I'm going to invent. But those three books will compose my life's work. And that, I don't even know what to call that, but it would be like, I guess that would be a full paradigm, because it composes all three fields: subjectivity, relativity, and objectivity. And that should be humanity's first paradigmatic, full-on integrated system, where the reason that I keep harping on that is because it will allow people, humans, to integrate every single aspect of their life, will have the same measure that they can use seamlessly throughout all of their events in their life, and be able to derive meaning and value from it. It may not be the right meaning and value for them, but it is a logically valid, empirically sound, and intuitively valuable system. So it will at least be something. And then in the future, people will come up with alternatives. And then there will be many, many, many flavors of this new dish that we're serving. So it's not that it's absolutely necessary, but it is inevitable in our evolution as a species that we will find structures and metastructures and omni-structures and all of this stuff it's just milestones on our path of evolution. And I want to contribute to that because I believe this is a very valuable enterprise to be had. It will integrate our civilization so that everything that we do will have momentum behind it. It'll be like, well, I'm doing this for a purpose because I belong to this purpose that I have in my life that makes sense to me, and I can follow it all the way back and all the way forward, before I was born and after I'll die, and everything in between, and I know how to make all those decisions, and I could teach it to someone else, and I could formalize it into an actual system, and I can prove every single thing that I make, every decision that I make is justified by all the stuff before it, all the way up until I reach that absolute limit of subjectivity where I'm just saying, because that's me. And then when I have to say that, then I've reached the absolute limit of my ability to justify myself. Because there are, certain things that we just randomly arbitrate. Like I was saying, every single theory in existence assumes something. And why does it assume that? Ultimately, it's because that's just who the person is that made that choice. And so that's the full breadth of the contextual value of Deus Ex Machina and lucidity and the Constitution and our place, among the stars with the SAMs and all of that, the intergalactic civilization conglomerate, whatever you want to call it.